Welcome, fellow fans. This week we're going to talk about colorectal cancer as a bit of a public service announcement given the recent passing of Chadwick Boseman, the actor who played Black Panther. His unfortunate and very early death kind of highlighted this particular disease for many of us in the health field. And so I'm going to kind of dissect an American Cancer Society's study that kind of gives some stats on colorectal cancer, the numbers for who's at risk, things that you can do to help reduce your risk, etc. So let's start by defining what exactly is colorectal cancer. And so there's a couple of terms that will help us understand the stages of colorectal cancer. First would be a polyp. Polyps are actually non-cancerous cells, but they are kind of the precursor to colon cancer. And so polyps can often be caught during regular screenings and treated before they become a real problem, which is the cancer. But then you have the first stage of colorectal cancer, which is a local cancer. And this is a group of cancer cells that are still kind of in the lining of the colon or the rectum and that have not spread into the lining. And then it progresses to a regional, which is this little bit larger growth that you see in the picture. The regional cancer has now spread into the lining of the colon, maybe even potentially a lymph node, but not beyond that. And then the last stage would be the distant. And so this definition of a cancer is now when the cancer cells have started to spread to other parts of the body. You can also hear them referred to as different stages 1 through 4. But when the cancer starts spreading to places like your liver and your lungs, you obviously are going to have a much harder time recovering from that. So the earlier you can catch it, the better we will be. That kind of brings us to some treatment options. And so treatment really depends on what stage your cancer is at or what level your cancer is at. If it's caught early enough that it's a polyp, your doctor will be able to, depending on what method they're exploring with, will potentially be able to just remove the polyp, especially if they're doing a colonoscopy, and then problem solved. However, you will probably want to start integrating some new lifestyle changes with diet and exercise into your routine so that you reduce your future risk for colorectal cancer or the development of polyps. If you do have something that is a little bit more aggressive, is an actual form of cancer, some of the treatment options are your standard cancer treatments, radiation, chemotherapy. You could also see what's called a colostomy, where they take a portion of your colon. That all just depends on what the recommendations of your doctor and your health team are for the type of expected outcome or health outcomes that you want. And so from there, we also want to talk a little bit about what are some of the symptoms. And so hopefully we can avoid this whole treatment phase of things by getting ahead of it and understanding what the symptoms are. We'll get to some things you can do in your lifestyle to help reduce your risk at the end. But some symptoms, actually, they're fairly hard to catch. So if you want to see the full list, you can go click on the link that I provided for this study. But the symptoms usually are bleeding, dark or black stool, potentially cramping or discomfort in your abdomen. And really, those are things that also could be problems from other things or other dietary issues. Maybe you think it's just a one-off. And this is why the symptoms are often hard to catch. And so regular screening is so important to making sure that we get ahead of identifying and preventing any type of cancer from taking root in your colorectal area. And so we'll move on to another slide now, which is our actual demographic breakdown. And so it might be difficult to see on this screen, but if it is, you can always click on the link and go to the actual picture that I have taken out of the survey or the study. But you can see, according to this, that Black men are at the highest rate of incident and the highest risk for mortality, followed by Native Americans and other indigenous populations in the US. The lowest demographic that is discussed on this chart would be the Asian Pacific Islander. However, the study did mention specifically individuals of Japanese descent. They are Asian Pacific Islander, but they do have a little bit higher than average for their demographic rate of incident as well as mortality rate. So if you're looking for more specifics on that, again, I refer you back to the study, but this is just a quick chart that you can kind of look at and use as kind of a baseline for how significant is your particular demographic at risk. And then again, we'll talk about more risk factors later. Our next slide just kind of breaks down by age what some of the different rates have been. So if you notice that in the ages of 20 to 49, the top two, there's actually been an increase in the rate of incident, although the mortality rate has stayed relatively flat. This is important because you start to see this decline in the rate of incidence and mortality in the next age group, which is the 50 to 64. That is mentioned in the study as they believe that the cause for that is really this increase in the younger age. So we're starting to see people at a younger age become diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And so it's got this kind of a skewed thing where it looks like if you're over the age of 50, it's not so bad. Well, it's really because people are getting it earlier. So the recommendations for screening are still age 50. However, if you have a higher risk for colorectal cancer, you may want to start having that conversation with your doctor or your medical team, your health team, as early as age 35, and potentially start having screenings as early as age 40. And so I hope, unfortunately, Chadwick Boseman's death kind of helps highlight that. And so I hope that anyone who looks at the risk factors and says, I've got multiple risk factors, I've got a fairly high risk score, I need to go have a conversation with my doctor. We can start reducing these numbers across all ages. The next couple slides are going to kind of highlight a few things with regards to geographic area. And so this particular slide really just highlights the number of people who are being screened for colorectal cancer over the age of 50. And so green is actually not a good thing in this particular slide. Here, green shows a very low rate of, or percentage of people being screened for colorectal cancer over the age of 50. So if you look at some of these states along the Gulf, and to include Texas, Oklahoma, up into the rest of the Midwest, you have fairly low percentages of adults 50 and older getting tested for colorectal cancer. That's all this is showing. But it becomes important when we start to look at this slide, which is the number of incidents and the mortality rate for males and females in these same states. So you see there that a lot of the Gulf states, again, where there's not a lot of screening happening, we are still seeing a fairly high incident rate as well as a fairly high mortality rate for colorectal cancer. This also looks a lot like the map of the US for obesity rates. And so obesity is another one of those risk factors, so it makes sense that these maps all kind of look the same. I don't have that map here because it wasn't part of this conversation, but I look at it every year. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for are risk factors. So this study breaks down a lot of the risk factors. At the very top there is family history. If you have one person in your family, your immediate family, you have a fairly high relative risk. But if you have more than one relative, you have this number 4 associated with you, which is the highest relative risk listed on this chart anyway. And then you can also start to see if you have a family history, if you are also diabetic, if you also consume alcohol regularly, and the more you consume, the higher your risk factor becomes. And all these different risk factors start to add up. So if you are somebody with a family history who drinks quite a bit and consumes a lot of meat products, and you smoke, you have an extremely high risk for colorectal cancer. And so you may want to start having a conversation with your doctor or with your health team about how you can start to reduce those risks. However, there are some things you can do that will work towards decreasing your risk, which would be regular physical activity. And this one was a little surprising to me. Regular consumption of dairy and or milk. And that is actually, in the study, it points to the amount of calcium that comes in those products as the cause for this reduction in risk for colorectal cancer. And then as far as screening options go, we can see here that there are multiple options now. This entire slide, you can see you have the first 3 options require a full bowel cleansing, so you're going to receive some type of fluid that really will help clean you out. Your doctor will prescribe that to you. And then this last one is potentially just a fast, drinking lots of water, but you may also receive something to help clear you out so your doctor can use a camera to see a little bit better while they're in there. And then this list of options would be your least disruptive to your daily life. This is the at-home version of a colon screening. You have probably seen some of the commercials for like Cologuard listed here. And so again, if this is going to be part of your process of starting to identify, you know, if you might have polyps, if you might have colorectal cancer, your doctor can prescribe one of these to you, and then you can go from there. I hope this has been helpful. I hope that you have a little bit more information that pertains to you specifically, so that you can go back to your doctor, to your health team, and have an educated conversation about your risk for colorectal cancer, as well as some things that you might be able to start implementing into your life or your daily routine to help reduce your risk for colorectal cancer. And if anyone ever has questions about another form of chronic disease that maybe runs in your family, feel free to send us a message and let us know. We may do another PSA. We may have a conversation with you directly. It just kind of depends on what you ask for, really. And thanks for tuning in. And next week we'll be trying to get a little bit of information about what it is that you guys want for our next series. So be sure to vote, and we'll see you soon.